Right, so buckle up for this deep dive, because we are going into some pretty uh, controversial territory today. We're tackling family dynamics, specifically mothers and sons.
Oh, okay.
And to guide our deep dive, we are looking at, get this, a YouTube clip from Jesse Lee Peterson.
Oh, boy.
Now, if you don't know who that is, don't worry about it. You're not alone, but just know that he is known for making some very, let's just say, provocative statements.
He does not hold back.
Not at all. Like using terms like evil to describe some mothers and claiming they are straight up destroying their sons.
Yeah, you really have to kind of brace yourself with this stuff because
a lot.
he goes there.
Yeah, he does. And,
Doesn't pull any punches.
it's interesting, though, because when you listen to his arguments,
Yeah.
he does this thing where he'll take something that sounds like, on the surface, good advice.
Right.
And then he'll twist it, make it seem like it's actually got these, like, sinister motivations behind it.
Yeah.
For example, he talks about mothers who encourage their sons to save money.
Yeah.
Which, okay, on its face, that's like responsible parenting, right?
Yeah. Teaching financial responsibility, good life skills.
Exactly.
Important.
But then Jesse Lee Peterson, he comes in and he's like, nope, that's manipulation, pure and simple. He suggests it's all about control, keeping those sons financially dependent so they can't, like, break free or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, how much is too much, right? Like, we want to teach our kids to be financially independent, but when does, like, encouragement veer into controlling the finances?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And is there even such a thing as too much encouragement when it comes to that?
That's a fine line, that's sure.
Because, finances are so tied to this idea of independence in our society.
Absolutely.
Like, you can't really be considered a fully independent adult until you're financially stable. At least that's the message a lot of us get growing up.
Right, right.
So Peterson really latches onto that,
Yeah.
He even goes so far as to connect this financial dependence to what he calls perverted behavior.
Okay, now he is going to get people fired up with that one.
Oh, absolutely. And to be clear,
Yeah,
we do not endorse that kind of language, but we do want to unpack his argument
of course.
because,
Yeah.
it's out there and people are listening.
And it's important to talk about why that kind of language can be so damaging
Absolutely.
and misleading.
So to be more specific, what Jesse Lee Peterson does is he draws this direct line, and it's like a straight line in his mind, between sons who are living at home with their mothers past a certain age
Okay.
and them seeking out, how should I put this, relationships with older women.
Ah, I see. The mama's boy stereotype rears its ugly head.
Yeah, and he even uses this phrase,
Oh boy, here it comes.
horny for mama,
Oh, wow.
which, I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's a new low, even for him.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can all agree that
It's a lot.
that's a lot.
Not only is it the language incredibly, like, degrading and just not okay, but there's also this huge problem
Yeah.
of generalizing about entire groups of people.
Exactly. Like, he's got it all figured out.
Right, like all sons who live with their mothers past a certain age are like this.
And all mothers are to blame.
Right. It's like, come on, can we acknowledge that family dynamics are a little more complex than that?
A little bit, yeah, just a tad.
There's no way you can boil it down to this, like, one-size-fits-all explanation.
No, and to do so is incredibly irresponsible,
Exactly, and I think that's what makes these conversations so tricky, because on the one hand, you have someone like Jesse Lee Peterson who's saying these really outlandish things,
Right.
but on the other hand, we have to, like, grapple with the fact that people are listening to him,
They are.
Like, his videos are getting views, people are commenting, they're engaging with this stuff, so it's like, we can't just ignore it.
We can't.
So how do we, as you were saying, how do we even begin to unpack this in a way that's both responsible and, actually gets to the heart of what's going on here?
Well, for starters, I think it's important to point out that Peterson doesn't offer any real evidence to back up his claims.
What do you mean?
Well, he's not citing any psychological studies
Oh, right.
or sociological research.
Okay, so it's just his opinion.
Pretty much, yeah. And while he's entitled to his opinion, we need to be careful not to present it as some kind of universal truth.
So it's like, take it with a grain of salt, a big one.
Giant Himalayan salt lick. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because otherwise, we risk perpetuating harmful stereotypes and generalizations.
Which, I mean, let's be honest, are often at the root of a lot of the problems we see in the world today.
Absolutely. And when it comes to something as complex as family dynamics, we need to be even more careful.
Yeah.
Because those relationships, they're shaped by so many factors.
Oh, I know. It's like, where do you even begin? You've got upbringing, you've got personality, you've got cultural influences.
Right.
And then you layer on top of that all the societal expectations and pressures.
It's a lot to untangle.
It really is. And I think that's why Peterson's perspective, while extreme, can be a good starting point for a conversation.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because it forces us to confront these, like, really uncomfortable truths about how we view mothers, how we view sons, and how those roles play out in our society.
And how maybe those views are a little outdated.
Exactly. Because let's be real, the world has changed a lot.
Yeah.
Even in just the last few decades.
Oh, yeah.
But the way we talk about these things, the way we think about these roles, it often feels very stuck in the past.
Right. Like we're trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
And then we wonder why things are so messy.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we're going to have any hope of moving forward, of creating a healthier dynamic between mothers and sons, then we need to be willing to have these tough conversations.
We do, and we need to be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Oh, definitely.
Because we all come to this with our own baggage, our own biases, and those can really cloud our judgment.
It's true. It's like we all have our own Jesse Lee Peterson voice in our heads sometimes, you know?
I think that's a really insightful way to put it, yeah.
Like that voice that jumps to conclusions, that makes these sweeping judgments. And it's so easy to let that voice take over.
It is.
But if we can learn to question that voice, to really examine where those thoughts are coming from, then maybe we could start to break down some of these harmful stereotypes and create a more understanding world.
It's not going to be easy.
Oh, definitely not.
But it's definitely necessary.
So let's dive in, shall we?
Let's do it.
It's almost like he's saying, look, these guys are messed up.
Right.
And it's because their mothers have made them this way.
Exactly. He puts the blame squarely on the mothers.
And then he brings up fathers, but not in the way you might think.
Oh, this should be good.
Right. You'd think he'd be like, fathers need to step up and be, strong role models. And while he does touch on that, it's more like he's criticizing fathers for not protecting their sons from these, like, overbearing mothers.
Interesting. So it's like he sees fathers as kind of failing in their duty.
Yeah. Yeah, like they're letting their sons down by not shielding them from this supposed maternal manipulation.
And he uses that term beta male.
Oh, yeah, he does.
Which is loaded, to say the least.
Very loaded. And it really plays into this whole idea of, like, what does it even mean to be a real man in this day and age?
Right, because is it about being dominant? Is it about being emotionally stoic? Is it about being the breadwinner?
And is it even fair to, like, put those kinds of expectations on men in the first place?
Exactly. And I think that's a conversation we need to be having more and more these days.
Absolutely, because the old script just doesn't seem to be working, does it?
Not for a lot of people, no.
And it feels like Peterson is trying to, like, cling to this very traditional, almost outdated view of masculinity.
No, it's interesting you say that because he actually brings up religion quite a bit.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, and it kind of ties into this whole masculinity thing.
Really? How so?
Well, he talks about mothers leading their sons away from God.
Okay.
And how that contributes to their supposed downfall.
So it's not just the financial dependence, it's also this, like, spiritual dependence that he sees as problematic.
Exactly. He seems to be saying that mothers are somehow hindering their sons' spiritual growth.
But doesn't he realize that spirituality can be a very personal thing?
You would think, right. But he seems to have a very specific idea of what it means to be spiritual.
And it has to line up with his beliefs, or else it's wrong.
Pretty much, yeah.
He uses this phrase, living in spirit and truth.
Right, and to him that means one very specific thing.
And anything else is just like leading these young men astray.
That's the gist of it.
It's almost like he's created this moral hierarchy with his definition of faith at the very top.
And if you don't fit into that hierarchy, you're somehow failing.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes his perspective so, I don't know, dangerous.
Dangerous, yeah. I think that's a good word for it.
Because it's one thing to have these beliefs yourself, but it's another thing entirely to impose them on others.
And to present them as the only way to live a good and fulfilling life.
Right, and when you start talking about mothers destroying their sons and leading them away from God, I mean, that's some pretty heavy stuff.
It is, and it's important to remember that these are just his opinions.
Opinions that are not based on any real evidence.
Exactly.
And while we can certainly respect his right to have those opinions,
of course,
we also have a responsibility to challenge them when they're harmful or misleading.
Absolutely, and I think that's what we're trying to do here, to have a nuanced and respectful conversation about these complex issues.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about who's right or who's wrong.
It's about understanding.
and about finding ways to support each other, to build each other up, and to create a more just and equitable world.
I think that's a great place to leave it for now.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
A lot of ground.
And I think it's important for everyone to sit with these ideas, to really reflect on what we've discussed.
And to come to your own conclusions.
It's tough, though, right? Because how do you have those conversations in a way that actually leads to progress?
It's not easy, that's for sure.
Because it feels like everyone's so dug into their own trenches these days.
Yeah, you know what you mean.
Like nobody wants to listen. They just want to be right.
It's all about winning the argument.
Exactly. And when it comes to something as sensitive and nuanced as family dynamics, well, there's no winners or losers, is there?
No, not at all. And I think that's what Peterson's approach really misses.
What do you mean?
Well, he frames everything as this battle, this fight between good and evil.
Right, with mothers as the villains.
Exactly.
And fathers as, like, the fallen heroes or something.
Yeah, it's a very simplistic, almost cartoonish view of a very complex issue.
And it doesn't leave much room for, like, actual human beings with their own experiences and perspectives.
Right, because not all mothers are manipulative.
And not all fathers are absent or passive.
And not all sons who live at home are, whatever.
Right, right.
We can't just slap these labels on people and pretend like we understand their entire story.
It's like he's trying to fit everyone into these neat little boxes.
When in reality, life is messy, families are messy.
And that's okay.
It is okay. It's normal even.
So if we're going to have any hope of moving forward, of actually addressing the challenges that young men are facing today, then we need to be willing to ditch the labels.
Absolutely.
And the generalizations.
And the judgment.
Yes, all of it.
And instead, we need to approach each other with empathy and understanding.
Easier said than done, though, am I right?
For sure. It takes effort. It takes conscious effort to step outside of our own bubbles and try to see the world through someone else's eyes.
And maybe even more importantly, it takes being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers.
Oh, absolutely, because none of us do.
And maybe that's okay, Maybe the point isn't to find all the answers, but to keep asking the questions.
And to keep listening to each other.
Exactly. And to keep learning and growing together.
Like beautifully said.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
A lot to unpack.
So until next time, keep those conversations going, be kind to each other, and remember, there's more that unites us than divides us.